So, what's the difference between fighting a war and bounty hunting?
If you make money from war, you're scum. But if you can't make money from bounty hunting, you're an idiot.
What's up guys, how you all doing? Welcome back to part 3 of this epic paint-a-thon. In this episode we'll be tackling the leather parts of his little flying cap thingy. So for our base colour we're going to start with some scale colour leather brown, and to that we'll add a little bit of scale colour black leather, which is a really nice dark purple colour. And we'll just paint this onto the whole of the cap. I had planned on keeping the black and white grain, which is why it's going on pretty thin here, but I figured
I can't do it. We'll do it live. We'll do it live! Fuck it! Do it live! I'll write it and we'll do it live! Fucking thing sucks!
So I just blocked in the colour and went for a more hardcore process. Alright, so once you've done the base coat, for the first highlight we're going to mix some scale colour Mars Orange into the base tone. Then using a pretty big brush we're going to block that in quite roughly, hitting all the raised areas. The approach we're going for here is to start with quite large unrefined highlights and then gradually increase the precision as our highlights get smaller and smaller. But for now we're just slapping the paint on there. I'm not really worried about blending or texture just yet. Add some more of that Mars Orange into your mix and we'll go back for a second round of highlights. This time we'll begin to add texture by painting fairly rough lines and dots of colour, and I'm still going to be using quite a big brush for this. On the folds, start with pretty broad strokes, then go back in with lots of little blobs of paint. Then on the top here we'll try to be pretty random and use a good mix of just random blobs of colour and cross-hatching lines over the surface. You can see that these are all quite unstudied, maybe even a bit rushed. I'm not putting a lot of thought into this, I'm just letting the brush dance over the surface, sometimes doing lines, sometimes little blobs. So you can see there that I'm painting lines at a bit of an angle, then once those are dry I'll go back and paint lines in the opposite direction, giving this sort of cross-hatching pattern. The idea here is that we want to build up a rough surface texture, and we'll use that to build on and refine with future highlights. Also, don't worry if you cover up previous brush strokes, it's all part of the process. At this stage it's more about building a base that you can refine later on. And you can see that I've switched to a slightly smaller brush, that's in order to get a more refined brush stroke. Add some more of the Mars Orange and we'll continue to build up the texture. Alright, so I'm going to try and be a little less rushed now and be more deliberate about where I'm placing the brush strokes. On these little bits I'm doing small blobs of paint along the edge just to get that texture going. Put quite a lot of cross-hatching on the top edge here. We want there to be quite a lot of wear on that part, and also the worn areas are going to double as a highlight. So we'll do the same thing on the other side, building up that rough texture with lots of little dots and lines. On this edge I'll do a broken edge highlight by just letting the side of the brush bounce along the surface, leaving a little trail of lines and dots. You can see here that on the top of the cap that smaller brush size is allowing us to be way more precise. I'm trying to just use mostly dots on these little folds near the base of the cap. And on the top part I'll use mainly cross-hatching, so I'll paint on a row of fairly fine lines at a bit of an angle, then I'll simply turn the model round and do the same thing in the other direction, so the lines are essentially perpendicular to each other, and that's going to help create this little grid pattern on the surface. Then once we've laid down that cross-hatching pattern, we'll go back and put in lots of little random dots and splodges over the top so that the pattern isn't too uniform. We want to keep quite a random appearance to it so it gives a more natural effect. To continue, we'll add a new colour into the mix now. This time we'll use scale colour Iroko. It's quite a nice brown, edging more into a yellow ochre. And this is going to tone down that orange quite a bit. We'll start at the front here just by adding those little dots along the trim. So again, I'm letting the tip of the brush bounce along the surface rather than placing each individual dot. I just kind of let my hand shake a little and let the dots fall where they may. Here on the side, as well as building up the texture with dots and cross-hatching, I'm also trying to put in some more deliberate scratches by painting a line or two crossing over into the darker areas. Catch the lower edges of those little holes, that's where the light would be hitting them, and also they would be quite worn there. And then we'll continue the texture on the top part using little dots and lines on those folds. So in this part we're using the same process as before by first doing some cross hatching and then going over it with some random little dots to break up the pattern. Yep, so that's starting to look pretty decent now. We'll mix a little more Iroko in there and go back for another round of highlights. So each time we go back with a new colour, we want to be a little bit more refined than the last time. I want to cover up less work from the last step and be more thoughtful about where I'm placing the highlights and scratches. You can see that texture is really starting to come together on the top now. So just keep adding layers of cross hatching, but try to focus on a smaller area this time. Also, I'm no longer sticking to just those perpendicular diagonal lines. I'm starting to throw in some vertical and horizontal lines. That's so that the texture near the top part of the cap gets really quite dense. Mix a little more Iroko into your highlight and we'll continue to refine the texture. So I'm trying to keep the detail really quite small now. Don't be scared to throw in some more obvious scratches just by painting a line over the surface. A couple of those here and there are going to give you a really nice effect and help to make the leather look more realistic. Mix some scale colour Birch in there and we'll build up those highlights and make them a bit more intense. You can see the texture is really starting to come together now. Just try and make your highlights at this stage quite controlled. The smaller your dots the better. There's a wee bit too much there, so we'll use our trusty clean brush to pull that out a bit. I've thinned the paint a little with some water here. That's so that we get a bit more control over how opaque it is on the top of the cap. Add a little more Birch and we'll continue going with the highlights. So I'm running out of things to say at this stage. It is really just a repeat of the previous step, but with a lighter colour and a bit more focus on what you're doing. So all this does seem quite laborious, but when you're actually painting it, it doesn't really feel that way because you get engrossed in what you're doing and you can see the gradual improvement each time you add a new colour. Alright, so we're going to change things up a bit now and add some black into our original base tone, and we'll use that to paint in some shadows, just because some of the areas are a little bit flat. So the space under this fold here would be really dark, so what we'll do is just paint the shadow in, and the same on the other side. And I'll pick out a couple of these creases too. Same sort of idea with these ear flap bits. I'll just pick out the shadow along the lower side. And then I'll add a few dots and lines around there just to keep the texture going. And then the same here on the other side. So we want more separation between the hat and the face. So what I'm going to do is paint a shadow just where the cap and face meet. You do need to be pretty careful here. You don't want to butcher the paint job on the skin. So this can be a little nerve-wracking, but you've just got to get it done really. I'll also line along this little crease at the edge, and then we'll paint some shadows along the base of the little folds on the top of the cap. Alright, to finish off we'll take some Birch just on its own and we'll use that to apply a few final highlights. Alright guys, so that is how you paint a pretty convincing worn leather effect. Let me know what you thought of the video. If you have any suggestions on what I could do to improve them, I'm open to hearing your ideas. The next video on this is going to show you how to do the strap and the goggles. Then we're going to take a look at the scarf and the shirt. As always, thank you very much for your support. I really appreciate all your help. Take care guys. Thanks again. Bye for now.